My goal was to get a better understanding on how the planes of the face interact with light and shadows. You don't need a goal for your studies, but I've found them to be much more effective when I have one in mind. Let's begin with the first portrait. This does seem to be a trend across my study sessions, is that the first one usually ends up not to my liking, mostly because it's stiff and it's usually the first thing that I'm drawing that day, so it just takes me a moment to kind of get in the flow of doing the studies. So the first portrait is nothing fancy, but I think that throughout the rest of them I've definitely found some improvement. So I bought a new set of mechanical pencils. It comes with a bunch of lead, and it even came with colored lead. And I wanted to try that out, so I grabbed the pink one and started sketching just to find out that it doesn't erase and that it's also very difficult to see, especially on my toned sketchbook pages. So it was really difficult to work with. The pink lead was just not fun at all. And after I had gone down somewhat of a sketch, I went in with pencil, and I don't know if I just couldn't find the right lines, but things were just not going well. In hindsight, I probably should have just sketched over the top and restarted with regular pencil, but I was trying to still kind of do all of these portraits in kind of a timely fashion. Overall, I think this first portrait ended up being pretty stiff. I do really like the curls over the face, and that's about it. I think that the hair is okay. I really didn't try with any of the hair in these portraits, and I definitely should take some more time to get better at drawing hair, but I was mostly focused on the face for these studies. Even though this first portrait was a bummer and I didn't really get out its intended purpose, I still learned a little bit about how to draw curly hair. The last thing that I would like to note about this first portrait is that the range of values is not very good. I do definitely improve on this in the other portrait studies, but this first one, I think that I was a little bit afraid of going too dark, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to really approach drawing the faces. In the past, when I did the 100 Scene Studies Challenge about 2 years ago, when I did those portraits, I did very minimal shading that was basically two-toned, so I haven't spent really any time at all learning how to shade the face. But I think that all of this changes when we jump into our second portrait, and this one turns out to be my favorite. I think that I actually did this one really well, and I'm really proud of it. Even now looking back at it, it is definitely my favorite one on this spread. It is the closest out of all four to the reference. I did make her look older in my sketch than she does in the reference photo, and I think that that's honestly because of the shading. I think that the shading on the under eyes is a little too dark, and even on top of the eyes, because I know that when people get older, they have a little bit less body fat in their face, so that can often give off the look of someone being older than they actually are. I also used a lot of angles around her face, which gave the same effect and didn't make her face look as round as it is in the reference picture. The way that I drew her face, especially that right side cheek, it does look a little bit rigid. Overall, I'm really impressed with how I shaded it. I think that I did a really good job of shading the nose, especially. I'm not very good at drawing noses, and I think that's one of my biggest problem areas with drawing faces right now. I think this was a very good practice. I really enjoyed doing this one, and I felt really proud of it. I was really struggling with the proportions in this one as I was in the first one. Plotting the facial proportions is definitely another part where I struggle, because something that I really want to focus on is capturing likeness in my portraits. I want it to actually look like the person that I'm trying to draw, and it's been a continuous issue for me as long as I've been an artist. And to be fair, it's because I don't do a lot of portraits. This was also where I started using my eraser to block out the brightest brights, even though they aren't that bright in the reference. Really pushing those values helped it come through on the page much better, and I was really happy with the result. So I think that this is definitely going to be how I approach portraits in the future, and this one has me really looking forward to doing some in the future. And it has even inspired me to perhaps go back to doing that 100 heads challenge that I did 2 years ago. So going into the second page, I did want to include some diversity in my studies. That is something that I struggle with a lot when it comes to my illustrations. I tend to draw people of generally the same facial features and same complexions. I wanted to take the time to start implementing people of more diversity than I'm accustomed to. I think that when I draw portraits, I definitely have an unconscious bias on the types of faces that I draw. I usually draw women of a medium to light complexion and generally kind of the same features. So once I got into this third portrait study, it was pretty difficult. I drew someone of a much darker complexion. I've drawn people of darker tones before, but I've never been very good at it, so I've pretty much steered away from it, and that's definitely not what I should be doing. I should be practicing it since it's something that I am more challenged by. I really struggled with this third portrait because, first off, it was really hard to start off because I was having that same issue of not being able to get the proportions of the face accurately, and they're still not perfect, of course, but I did finally land on one that made sense. I had to take a step back from my sketchbook and kind of extend my arms all the way to kind of draw from afar, and then also I propped up my phone across my desk so that way I wouldn't try to start getting lost in the details. I do have a pretty pretty bad habit of jumping into whatever seems to be the focal point of the picture. It usually tends to be the eyes or nose or some sort of feature that just kind of pops out from the rest. I usually start diving into detailing before I've even gotten everything to its proper proportion. Some of the features that I had a lot of issue with was the nose, because I haven't been gravitating towards those studies with different noses and things. So I mean, even in the second portrait, that was a bit of a different one for me, because I'm used to drawing noses that are kind of more button shaped. In the third portrait, I'm pretty sure she has a hooked nose. And then another part that I had an issue with was the lips. I really struggle with drawing people that have larger and fuller lips. I overall just struggled with everything on this face. I don't even draw faces from the side view. I like to draw faces from the front and from the 3/4 point. That could have been another reason that the first portrait didn't go very well, because it was also a side view. So this third one was quite the challenge, but in the end I think I pulled it through. I think that I still could have pushed the shading more. I don't think it's quite to where I would like it to be. I struggle with getting very light tones in pencil because I'm just very heavy-handed, and I often will go too dark too fast. So it's really difficult for me to do it this way. I think in the future I'll probably try out using other mediums, but I definitely want to get better at this in pencil as well. I wanted to talk briefly about why I have been doing so many studies lately, and it's because I want to really push my art into a direction where I can become a professional. I don't think I'm quite at the skill set yet, but I definitely want to start moving in that direction as I look for more professional work with my artwork. So something that I have noticed and admired by people that I look up to that are full-time professional artists, such as Chris Hong and Loish, is that they consistently, frequently do studies just as much, if not more, than they do their finished illustrative work. So I really want to embrace doing studies and focus on doing them at a pretty high frequency. So you're going to see a lot more studies from me. I have a lot planned, and I definitely want to make sure that I'm doing studies before my illustrations, and I want to make sure that I'm going in more confidently when I am sketching out my illustrations. And then some final thoughts on this third portrait. I kind of like the strange hatching that resulted in the hair, because I was not planning on doing any details. I really like the hatching, especially around the face where I am actually indicating the hairs that do overlap on the face. I think that that's definitely an interesting stylistic choice. Obviously, in the future, if I continue to do it that way, I would like it to be an intentional choice and not because I don't know how to draw hair. I definitely need to work on ears. That is a pretty big trend amongst these portraits, is that I've just not been very successful at drawing ears. I've neglected them and really only focused on the faces. I definitely want to do more narrowed focus in the future, narrowed studies of the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, kind of focus on those really important features and try to learn more about them. But like I said earlier, the goal for this was to learn more about the planes of the face, and that was specifically because I've been trying to go in a more realistic shading route with my illustrations, and it's really difficult for me to learn how to shade a face properly if I don't understand how the forms of the face interact with the lighting in that situation. I was really proud of how my third portrait came out, so I was like, okay, let's push this even further and draw men, which if you have seen in previous videos, I stay away from drawing men. I don't really draw men at all. And I've only started drawing men because I've been doing more kind of self-insert type work where I do illustrations based off of mine and my boyfriend's life. This has been the only time that I've actually started including men in my illustrations, and I can definitely see where that has impacted my work because I have a really, really hard time drawing my boyfriend. So I wanted to start drawing men and including them in my studies by doing this fourth one. However, by the time I got to this point, like I mentioned earlier, my hand was getting tired. I had been pushing really hard on my pencil and using my blending stump to death, so when I got to this one, I honestly was being really lazy with it. It turns out pretty bad. Not as bad as the first portrait study I did, but it's definitely nothing like the reference, and it was a mess. But as much as this last portrait ended horribly and was a mess, I did actually learn a lot. It helped a lot going into these little illustrations that I have coming up. Last week I did a tiny portrait of myself in watercolors with butterflies right after I finished my larger illustration. I wanted to do something like that again, but I did a really good sketch of my boyfriend. So I've been turning those into a little illustration where it's me and my boyfriend side by side and a lot of butterflies. But I learned a lot doing this portrait study that I was able to apply to that miniature illustration. Something that I haven't really taken into account before is that men and women could have different face shapes, which I know kind of sounds ridiculous because it's almost obvious, but it wasn't to me because I don't ever draw men. But I noticed that with men, they do have more chiseled features. The thing that was most helpful for me drawing my boyfriend is men tend to have a broader chin and a more square chiseled jawline, if that makes any sense. And my boyfriend definitely has that broader chin and a more defined jawline. I have a much rounder face than my boyfriend, so I've been trying to really push those elements of our facial features to make us more identifiable in my illustrations. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.